life, more than 20 years, my parents treated me as the slow child of the family, while my sister Isabella Russo collected prestigious degrees and the quiet promise that one day she would inherit everything. At family dinners, they joked about my dyslexia, left me out of important decisions, and paid me a fraction of what they paid her. But on the night of Isabella's graduation celebration at the Plaza Hotel, with 350 guests watching, a stranger placed an envelope in my hands that would unravel every lie my parents had told about me. What none of them realized was that my grandmother had been watching the entire time. She saw everything. And before she died, she left behind something powerful enough to turn the entire Russo empire upside down. To better understand what happened, you need to understand this. The Russos were old Manhattan money, the type of family whose name appeared on hospital wings and museum plaques. My father, Vincent Russo, ran Russo Development Group, a commercial real estate company my grandmother, Margaret Sinclair, had built from a single office in Brooklyn in 1965. By 2024, the company was worth about $110 million. I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was 7 years old. Words on a page seemed to move and rearrange themselves, turning even simple sentences into puzzles that took me 3 times longer to understand than other children. My parents did not respond with support. They responded with embarrassment. When I was 12, they paid for Isabella to have private violin instructors at Juilliard, French immersion classes, and SAT tutors who charged $400 an hour. When I asked for help with my reading, my mother, Adriana Russo, only sighed and said we had already spent too much money on specialists. She told me that some children simply were not academic. I was 12 years old, and I believed her. So I taught myself how to adapt. Audiobooks became my lifeline. I built my own system of visual notes, diagrams, and flowcharts that helped me process ideas in ways ordinary reading never could. Every Sunday afternoon, I took the train to my grandmother's apartment on the Upper West Side. She would sit with me for hours, explaining complicated ideas through stories rather than textbooks. One afternoon, she placed her weathered hand over mine and said, "Gloria, you may read more slowly than others, but you notice things they never see. That is not a weakness. It is a different kind of vision." At the time, I did not fully understand what she meant. I would, eventually. But first, I had to endure 19 more years of being treated as the Russo family's quiet embarrassment. Christmas of 2021 made that painfully clear. 20 relatives sat around the long mahogany table in my parents' townhouse on the Upper East Side. Crystal chandeliers hung above a catered dinner that felt less like a holiday gathering and more like a performance of Russo family perfection. My father stood at the head of the table and raised his wine glass. He spoke with the same confident authority he used in boardrooms. "I have an announcement," he said. "Isabella has been accepted into Columbia Law School on a full scholarship." The room erupted in applause. Isabella lowered her head modestly, while my father continued proudly. He said she would be the first Russo in 3 generations to attend Columbia, and that she would lead both the family and the company to extraordinary heights. More applause followed. An uncle clapped Isabella on the shoulder. An aunt wiped tears from her eyes. Then my father's gaze drifted down the table until it reached me. "And Gloria," he said after a pause, his voice suddenly colder. "Well, Gloria is also here tonight." A few relatives laughed softly, the awkward kind of laughter people use when they do not know what else to do. Isabella did not defend me. She laughed with them. I stared down at my plate while the roasted lamb blurred through tears I refused to let fall. Beneath the table, someone gently squeezed my hand. It was my grandmother, Margaret Sinclair. When I looked up, I saw something fierce in her eyes, something that looked dangerously close to anger directed at her own son. She did not speak that night. But 3 months later, she called me to her apartment and told me she had something important to show me. At the time, I had no idea that the humiliation of that Christmas dinner, witnessed by 20 members of my family, had set a chain of events into motion. It would take 5 years before everything finally exploded. In 2022, I graduated from a state university. Not an Ivy League school, never an Ivy. Still, I applied for a job at Russo Development Group because I wanted to prove I could contribute to the family business. My father agreed to hire me as an administrative assistant with a salary of $48,000 a year. That same month, Isabella joined the company as chief legal counsel with a salary of $300,000 plus bonuses. My responsibilities included photocopying documents, scheduling conference rooms, and delivering coffee to executives who rarely bothered to learn my name. I was never invited into a single meeting. No one ever showed me a contract or asked for my opinion. But I watched, and I listened. During those long hours in the copy room, I discovered something unexpected about myself. I could recognize patterns other people overlooked. When executives discussed deals in the hallway, I quietly sketched diagrams showing how the parties were connected, how the money moved, and where conflicts might appear. What had started as a strategy to cope with my reading difficulties slowly became something far more valuable. My grandmother, Margaret Sinclair, had taught me how to think that way. On those Sunday afternoons in her apartment, she would spread out old contracts from the earliest days of Russo Development Group and show me how to study them, not word by word, but as systems, as structures. "Your father reads contracts like a lawyer," she told me once in 2019, shortly before her health began to decline. "He searches for weaknesses he can exploit. You read them like an architect. You see how every piece fits together." That same afternoon, she handed me a small wooden box made of polished mahogany with brass hinges. "Keep this somewhere safe," she said, "and do not open it yet. When the time comes, you will understand." I took the box home and placed it in the back of my closet. For months, I tried to forget about it, though the weight of her words stayed with me. In March of 2019, I visited her again at her apartment. She was 82 then. Her once strong frame had grown thin, and her silver hair rested lightly against the cushion of her chair. Yet the sharp intelligence in her eyes had not faded. "Sit down, Gloria," she said. I sat across from her in the living room, where we had spent so many quiet Sundays together. Photographs covered the walls. There were pictures of Margaret breaking ground on her first Brooklyn property in 1965, shaking hands with the mayor, and accepting a major business award in the late 80s. There was not a single photograph of my father leading the company. "I built Russo Development Group from nothing," she said, her voice still carrying the strength of decades of work. "One small office, one secretary, and 60 years of persistence." She paused for a moment. A trace of bitterness crossed her face. "Your father inherited it. He never built anything himself. He does not understand what it means to create something from the ground up." I tried to defend him. I told her that he judged people by their credentials, their degrees, and how well they performed in boardrooms. She leaned forward slightly. "I judge people by how they treat those who cannot fight back," she said quietly. "And Gloria, you are the only person in this family who still knows how to be kind." Then she placed the wooden box in my hands again. "There is something inside that may help you one day," she said. "But not yet. You are not ready, and neither is Vincent." Her grip tightened around my fingers. When the moment comes, when he shows you exactly who he truly is, you will know what to do. I wanted to ask her what she meant. I wanted to know what was inside the box and why she had chosen me, but she changed the subject and began talking about her garden, the weather, and the book she was reading. 18 months later, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer. I held her hand in the hospice during her final hours. I was the only member of our family sitting beside her. The box stayed unopened in my closet. Then April of 2024 arrived. The email came on a Tuesday afternoon. The subject line read, "Position restructuring, confidential." Dear Ms. Russo, as part of our ongoing organizational optimization, your current role will be eliminated effective July 1st, 2024. Human Resources will contact you regarding severance arrangements. I read the message 3 times. The words seemed to blur and rearrange themselves before settling back into the same terrible conclusion. They were firing me. That evening I stayed late, organizing files that no one would ever review again. "Takes over," my father said. "It looks takes over," my father said. "It looks terrible. The CEO's sister working as a secretary? People will start asking questions." "What kind of questions?" my mother asked. "Why she is not in leadership. Why she was never promoted." He paused. "Why she is the way she is." My mother's voice softened as if she were discussing someone fragile. "We did everything we could for her, Vincent. Some children simply do not have what it takes." "Exactly," my father replied. "So it is time for her to leave. We will give her a generous severance package. She can find something more suitable for her abilities." I pressed my palm against the wall, trying to steady myself. My salary was $48,000 a year. My small apartment in Queens, which I shared with 2 roommates, cost $1,800 each month. I had no savings and no safety net. Without that job, I would be broke within weeks. But the fear tightening in my chest was not really about money. It was the realization slowly settling over me like frost. If I accepted this quietly, if I allowed them to define me the way they always had, then the rest of my life would follow the same pattern. I would remain the family disappointment. Not because I had actually failed, but because I had never been given the opportunity to succeed. And tomorrow night was Isabella's graduation party. I kept wondering what other announcements my father might have planned. May 15th, 2024. The Plaza Hotel, Grand Ballroom. 350 guests filled the glittering hall. Business partners, investors, powerful attorneys from prestigious firms, and distant relatives I barely recognized moved between the tables. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across rows of silk tablecloths, while a 12-piece orchestra played Gershwin softly in the background. This was Vincent Russo's world, his stage, the place where he performed his role as patriarch, tycoon, and the man who seemed to control everything. I stood near the entrance, nervously smoothing the hem of my dress. It was a simple black dress that cost $79 from Zara, the best I could afford on my salary. Around me, women shimmered in designer gowns, while men wore perfectly tailored tuxedos. Before I could even look for my seat, my mother stepped directly in front of me. Gloria. Her eyes moved slowly from my inexpensive makeup to my worn heels. Her lips tightened with quiet disapproval. "You could not find something nicer to wear?" "This is what I have," I said. She adjusted the bracelet on her wrist, as if the conversation bored her. "You will sit at table 27 near the service entrance. Try not to draw attention to yourself." I nodded. "And Gloria," she added, leaning closer, the scent of expensive perfume surrounding her. "Tonight is Isabella's night. Whatever resentment you think you deserve to feel, keep it to yourself. Do not embarrass us." She walked away before I could respond. Table 27 was exactly where she had said it would be, at the very back of the ballroom, half hidden behind a large marble pillar. The people seated with me were distant cousins I had only met once or twice. From that corner of the room, I could see the stage clearly. Above it hung a massive portrait of Isabella Russo, wearing her graduation robes from Columbia Law School, along with a banner that read, "Congratulations, Isabella Russo, Columbia Law, Class of 2024. Near the entrance stood a man with silver hair, wearing a gray suit. He was not speaking to anyone. He was not eating or drinking. He simply watched the room. At one point, his eyes met mine across the crowd. A chill ran through me, though I had no idea why. At exactly 8:30 p.m., the orchestra stopped playing. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight illuminated the stage. My father stepped forward, holding a glass of champagne. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate an extraordinary young woman." Applause erupted before he even finished the sentence. Isabella graduated in the top 5% of her class at Columbia Law School. She completed a clerkship with Justice Reynolds, and last month she joined Russo Development Group as the company's in-house counsel. His voice swelled with pride. But tonight, we are not only celebrating her achievements. Tonight, I want to announce her future. Isabella joined him on stage, glowing in a deep green designer gown. "Effective immediately," my father continued, "Isabella Russo will inherit my entire estate when the time comes." He began listing the assets one by one. "Our family residence on Park Avenue, valued at approximately $16 million. My Porsche Taycan Turbo. And most importantly," he paused dramatically, "the position of CEO of Russo Development Group when I retire." The ballroom exploded with applause. People rose to their feet. Cameras flashed everywhere. Isabella pressed a hand to her eyes as if she were overwhelmed with emotion. 350 people celebrated her future. Not one of them looked toward table 27. The woman sitting beside me leaned over. I remembered her vaguely from a funeral years ago. "You're Gloria, right?" she asked quietly. "So what does that mean for you?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What could I possibly say? That I had just been erased from my own family, in front of hundreds of witnesses? That the termination letter sitting in my inbox was probably only the beginning? That every fear I had ever carried about being worthless had just been confirmed in public? Eventually, the applause faded. Isabella embraced our father on stage, while photographers crowded closer. Then I noticed movement near the entrance. The silver-haired man in the gray suit had started walking toward me. He moved slowly through the crowd, with the calm confidence of someone who had waited a long time for this exact moment. He stopped beside my table. Up close, he looked older than I first thought, probably in his early 60s. His posture was precise, the posture of a man who had spent decades inside courtrooms. "Miss Russo?" "That's me," I said, sitting up straighter. "Can I help you?" "My name is Daniel Whitaker." He handed me a business card embossed with the name Whitaker and Hale, Attorneys at Law. "I served as your grandmother's attorney. Before she passed away, your grandmother gave me very specific instructions. She believed there might come a day when your father would publicly erase you from the family. If that moment ever happened, I was told to find you and deliver this immediately." My chest tightened. "My grandmother?" I repeated. "Margaret Sinclair passed away 3 years ago." "I know," he said calmly. "And before she died, She left something for you. She gave very specific instructions about when I was supposed to deliver it. From inside his jacket, he pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax and a notary stamp. "What is this?" I asked. "Her will," he said quietly. "The real one." He lowered his voice even further. "The one your father does not know exists." I stared at the envelope in my hands. The notary seal read Whitaker and Hale. The date beneath it was September 12th, 2019. 5 months after the afternoon my grandmother had given me the wooden box. 5 months after she had warned me about the moment when everything would change. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Your grandmother gave me very precise instructions," Daniel Whitaker said quietly. "I was told to deliver this document on the day your father publicly disinherited you." He briefly glanced toward the stage where Vincent Russo and Isabella were still surrounded by applause and flashing cameras. I believe that moment just happened. My hands trembled as I accepted the envelope. "What is inside this?" I asked. For the first time, something almost gentle appeared in his expression. "Mrs. Margaret Sinclair asked me to tell you this," he said. "Give this to Gloria on the day Vincent shows her exactly who he truly is. By then, she will be ready." He adjusted his tie and handed me another card. "If you have questions, you know how to reach me." Then he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Suddenly, the ballroom felt suffocating. I slipped through the service entrance and found an empty hallway near the kitchens. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, while the sound of celebration from the ballroom faded into a distant murmur. My fingers shook as I broke the wax seal. Inside were 3 pages of dense legal language, notarized and dated September 12th, 2019. I forced myself to read slowly. The letters blurred for a moment before settling into focus. "I, Margaret Sinclair, being of sound mind and body, hereby revoke all previous testamentary documents and declare this to be my final will and testament." My eyes moved down the page until one paragraph stopped me cold. "To my granddaughter, Gloria Russo, I leave 52% of my shares in Russo Development Group, currently valued at approximately $57 million, along with all associated voting rights." I read the sentence again and again. 52%, controlling ownership. The will continued. "This decision is made with full knowledge of my son Vincent's treatment of Gloria. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not because she lacks ability, but because she lacked support. Gloria is not slow. Gloria was abandoned. I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death." A sob caught in my throat. My grandmother had seen everything. Every insult, every dismissal, every moment I had been pushed aside. There was one more section, a condition. To activate this inheritance, Gloria Russo must request an emergency meeting of the board of directors within 72 hours of receiving this document. Failure to do so will render this will void, and all assets will transfer according to my previous testament dated 2015. 72 hours. The deadline would be 8:30 p.m., May 18th. I leaned against the cold hallway wall, clutching the document to my chest. My grandmother had given me a weapon. Now I had to decide whether I was brave enough to use it. When I returned to the main lobby, Daniel Whitaker was waiting near the coat check. "You read it," he said. "The 72-hour clause," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. Why would she include something like that? He handed me another card, this one with a personal number written on the back. "Your grandmother understood you very well, Miss Russo," he said. "She knew that if you were given unlimited time, you might convince yourself not to act." He glanced at his watch. "The deadline is not a punishment. It is permission. Permission to stop waiting for your family to finally recognize your worth. Permission to claim what already belongs to you. And he looked directly at me. The deadline is May 18th at 8:30 p.m., 3 days from now. If you choose to proceed, you must formally request an emergency board meeting. I can assist you with the paperwork. Through the ballroom doors, I could still see my father posing for photographs beside Isabella. My mother moved through the crowd, smiling proudly as guests congratulated her. If I used this will, everything would change. My parents would never forgive me. Isabella would see it as betrayal. But if I stayed silent, I would accept the role they had written for me. The failure, the slow one, the daughter who never mattered. Miss Rousseau? Whitaker's voice interrupted my thoughts. Your grandmother spent the last 3 years of her life preparing for this moment. She believed in you. He paused. The real question is whether you believe in yourself. I looked down at the will again, at the elegant signature of the woman who had held my hand under Christmas tables and taught me to read contracts like architecture. I'll call you tomorrow, I said quietly. We're requesting that board meeting. Whitaker allowed himself a small smile. She said you would. Later that night, back in my cramped apartment in Queens, I finally opened the wooden box my grandmother had given me years earlier. My roommates were asleep. The only light in the room came from the street lamp outside the window, casting pale orange stripes across my bed. I sat cross-legged with the mahogany box resting in my lap. The brass hinges creaked softly as I lifted the lid. Inside were 3 things: a handwritten letter on my grandmother's personal stationery, a faded legal document stamped 1965, and a small USB drive that had clearly been added much later. I picked up the letter first. My dearest Gloria, if you are reading this, then Daniel has done his job, and your father has done exactly what I feared he would do. I am sorry I could not protect you while I was alive, but I can protect you now. The document enclosed here is the original partnership agreement from 1965, the year I founded Russo Development Group, with 2 partners who are no longer with us. Your father has never seen this agreement. It establishes that the founder's shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted or transferred without the approval of the board. The USB drive contains something else, something your father hoped I had forgotten. In 2018, Vincent attempted to pass a resolution that would reduce my voting power from 52% to 10%. His explanation was that I was too old to understand modern business. The real reason was much simpler. He wanted control, and I was standing in his way. The board rejected his proposal by 2 votes. One of those votes was mine. I never forgot what he tried to do, and I never forgave him for the way he treated you in order to justify it, as if diminishing you somehow proved I had become unfit. Use this wisely, Gloria, not for revenge, but for justice. All my love, Grandma Margaret. I stared at the letter for a long moment before plugging the USB drive into my laptop. Inside was a single file. Board meeting minutes, March 2018. The document contained a full transcript and recording of the meeting where my father had tried to strip his own mother of power. It was time-stamped and documented in detail. Proof. The next morning, May 16th, I made a phone call. Helen Bradford answered on the second ring. Gloria Russo, she said, her voice rough with age and experience. I was wondering when you would finally call. You know who I am? Of course I do. Your grandmother and I built half of Brooklyn together in the 70s. She talked about you constantly. There was a pause. She also told me about the will 3 years ago, shortly before she died. I tightened my grip on the phone. Then you already know what I'm planning. I know what you're considering, Helen said. Those are 2 different things. Her voice shifted, becoming sharper and more businesslike. You want to call an emergency board meeting. That requires 3 board members to sign the petition. I am one of them. You will need 2 more. Can you help me find them? I can do better than that. I heard papers moving on her desk. Your father is not nearly as popular as he thinks. His management style has created enemies. At least 4 board members have privately expressed concerns. They simply need someone brave enough to move first. Hope stirred in my chest. Who? Thomas Caldwell and Laura Bennett, she said. Both have had their share of confrontations with Vincent behind closed doors. I will speak to them. She paused again. But Gloria, you need to understand something. This will not be pleasant. Your father will fight. Your sister will fight. They will say things designed to hurt you. They have been saying things designed to hurt me my entire life, I replied. At least now I get to answer. Helen laughed, a warm, approving sound. Margaret always said there was steel beneath that quiet exterior. I think I am starting to see it. She cleared her throat. I will have the petition ready tonight. Emergency board meeting request for May 18th at 10 a.m., Russo Tower, 42nd floor. Thank you, Helen. Do not thank me yet, she said. Thank me after you walk into that boardroom. On May 17th, my father learned about the meeting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I know the exact time because Isabella called me 45 minutes later. What did you do? She demanded. I was sitting in my cubicle at Russo Development Group, pretending to organize files. I have no idea what you mean. Dad just received a notice from the board secretary. There's an emergency meeting tomorrow requested by Helen Bradford and 2 other directors. Her voice sharpened. Helen Bradford has not requested anything in 15 years. What did you do? Maybe she has concerns about company management. Do not play games with me, Gloria, Isabella snapped. If you are trying to embarrass this family, if you are planning some kind of stunt, I am doing my job, I said calmly, just like always. She hung up without another word. 20 minutes later, my father stormed past my cubicle and slammed the door to his office hard enough to rattle the glass. He never looked at me. Through the wall, I could hear him talking on the phone. This is ridiculous, he said. A complete waste of time. Helen is probably going senile. We will address her concerns and move on. A pause. No, I am not worried. Gloria, please. She can barely read a spreadsheet. She is not a threat to anyone. I smiled quietly at my desk. For the first time in 28 years, being underestimated worked in my favor. That night, I prepared carefully in my small apartment. I printed 3 copies of the will, saved the 2018 board meeting evidence on my phone, and wrote a short statement that simply presented the facts. Daniel Whitaker confirmed he would attend the meeting to authenticate the document. At 11 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message from Helen. Petition filed. See you tomorrow. Your grandmother would be proud. I barely slept that night, but it was not fear that kept me awake. It was anticipation. May 18th, 2024, 9:45 a.m., Russo Tower. The elevator opened onto the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan. Italian marble floors reflected the morning light. The entire space was designed to intimidate. I stepped out wearing a gray blazer borrowed from one of my roommates, 2 sizes too large. In my hand was a leather portfolio I had bought at Goodwill for $12. The security guard standing outside the boardroom raised his hand to stop me. Name? Gloria Russo. He checked the tablet in his hand and frowned. You are not on the authorized attendee list. I work for Russo Development Group, I said calmly, and I have business with the board. Ma'am, this is a restricted meeting. I cannot allow... Is there a problem? The voice came from behind me. I turned and saw Isabella walking down the hallway. She looked flawless in a navy power suit with an elegant silk scarf, the uniform of someone who belonged in rooms like this. "Gloria?" she said, smiling in a way that never reached her eyes. "What exactly are you doing here?" "I have information to present to the board." "Information?" Isabella laughed lightly. "About what? You work in the copy room." "The nature of my presentation is confidential." "You do not even know what ROI stands for." "Return on investment," I replied evenly. "It is not that complicated." For a brief moment, her smile faltered. Before she could answer, my father appeared at the far end of the hallway, accompanied by 2 senior executives. "What is going on here?" Vincent Russo demanded. "Gloria wants to attend the board meeting," Isabella said quickly. "I was just explaining that it is not possible." My father looked at me the way he always had, as if I were a problem he had never quite managed to solve. "Gloria, go back to your desk," he said. "This meeting does not concern you." "Actually," another voice interrupted from inside the boardroom, "it does." Everyone turned. Helen Bradford stood in the doorway. She was 72. Her silver hair pulled neatly back, her presence carrying the quiet authority of someone who had been building empires long before Vincent Russo ever entered the business world. "I invited her," Helen said simply. "She has standing to address the board." She stepped aside slightly and gestured toward the room. "Let her in." My father's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might block the doorway himself. But Helen Bradford had been a board member for more than 3 decades. In that room, her authority outranked his. "Fine," my father said coldly. "Let her speak. We will see how quickly she embarrasses herself." The boardroom was smaller than I expected. A polished walnut table filled the center of the room, surrounded by 12 leather chairs. Portraits of former executives lined the walls. Above the fireplace hung a familiar painting. My grandmother, Margaret Sinclair. Her painted eyes seemed to watch the room carefully. The board members took their seats. My father sat at the head of the table. Isabella took the chair beside him, not officially a board member yet, but clearly positioned as the future leader of the company. I was directed to a seat at the far end of the table, as if I were a child invited to watch the adults conduct serious business. In the corner sat Daniel Whitaker, his briefcase resting beside him. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod. At the center of the table, Charles Davenport, the chairman of the board, cleared his throat. "This emergency meeting was requested by Helen Bradford, Thomas Caldwell, and Laura Bennett," he said. "Helen, you have the floor." Helen nodded calmly. "Thank you, Charles. I will be brief." She turned slightly and gestured toward me. "The matter I wish to raise concerns a document that has recently come to light, a document that directly affects the ownership structure of this company." She stepped back. "I yield my time to Miss Gloria Russo." Every head in the room turned toward me. Isabella leaned back in her chair with an amused expression. My father folded his hands and watched with visible impatience. I stood. My hands were steadier than I expected. "Thank you, Mrs. Bradford," I said, "and thank you to the board for allowing me to speak." I opened the portfolio in front of me. What I am about to present may come as a surprise. I ask only that you listen to the evidence before drawing any conclusions. My father sighed loudly. I ignored him. Before I could continue, he raised his hand. "I apologize, Charles," Vincent said, standing slowly as he adjusted his jacket. "But before we waste the board's time, I feel some context is necessary." "Vincent," Helen began. "Gloria is my daughter," he continued smoothly, his voice filled with the same patronizing warmth he used when speaking to difficult clients. and I care about her deeply. However, she is not qualified to address this board on any serious matter." He gestured toward me dismissively. "She works in an administrative capacity. She has no legal training, no financial background, and no experience in strategic leadership." Isabella leaned forward with a sympathetic smile. "Gloria also has dyslexia," she added gently. "Reading has always been difficult for her. We have tried to support her over the years, but some limitations simply cannot be overcome." Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "What we are witnessing," my father continued, "is a young woman reacting emotionally, perhaps because of the announcement made at Isabella's celebration. Sibling jealousy can be difficult to manage." "Mr. Russo," Charles Davenport's voice cut sharply across the room, "you will have an opportunity to respond later. Miss Russo requested the floor, and she is entitled to use it." My father sat down slowly, his expression promising consequences. Across the table, Isabella caught my eye and mouthed silently, "You are embarrassing yourself." I looked at both of them. For years, I had felt anger when they treated me this way. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. The feeling was colder, clearer. They were not protecting me. They were protecting their story. The story where I was nothing. "Thank you, Mr. Davenport," I said. I removed a document from my portfolio. "I will not be discussing my reading ability today," I continued calmly. "I will be discussing this." I held up the paper. The room fell silent. "This is the final will and testament of Margaret Sinclair, founder of Russo Development Group. It was notarized on September 12, 2019. My father's face lost all color. "That's impossible." My father's voice came out strained. "My mother's will was finalized in 2015. I have a copy of it." "You have a copy of her previous will," I replied calmly. My tone stayed steady and precise. "Under New York estates law, a later valid will automatically revokes all earlier testamentary documents. This will," I said as I placed the paper on the table, "was executed 4 years after the one you're referring to." I slid the document across the polished surface toward Charles Davenport. "Mr. Whitaker," I said, turning slightly toward the corner of the room where Daniel Whitaker sat, "would you please confirm the authenticity of this document?" Whitaker stood and walked toward the table. "My name is Daniel Whitaker," he said, "partner at Whitaker & Hale. I served as Margaret Sinclair's personal attorney from 2008 until her passing in 2021. He placed a hand lightly on the document. "I can confirm that this will was executed in my presence on September 12, 2019. It was witnessed by 2 independent notaries, and the original document is currently held in escrow with Chase Private Client." Charles Davenport studied the will carefully. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "This document transfers 52% of Margaret Sinclair's shares in Russo Development Group," he said slowly. He looked up at me. "To you, Miss Russo." A ripple of murmurs spread around the table. "That's a forgery," Isabella said quickly, though the confidence had drained from her voice. "It is not," Whitaker replied immediately. "And I would strongly advise against making accusations of fraud without evidence, Miss Russo. Our firm's reputation speaks for itself." My father slammed his hand against the table. "This is ridiculous," Vincent snapped. "My mother was elderly. She was being manipulated." "Manipulated?" I said quietly. I took my phone from my portfolio. "Perhaps you can explain this." I pressed play. The audio recording from the March 2018 board meeting filled the room. My father's voice echoed clearly from the speaker. "Margaret is 81 years old. She doesn't understand modern business operations. I propose reducing her voting rights to 10%. The recording ended. Silence fell across the boardroom. "That recording," my father said sharply, his face turning a deep shade of red. "Was from a private board meeting." "Yes," I said evenly. "A meeting my grandmother attended as the majority shareholder. She recorded it, which she was fully entitled to do." Charles Davenport slowly set the will down on the table. His expression had shifted. "Miss Russo," he said, "would you please read the relevant passage for the record?" I nodded and took a steady breath. "To my granddaughter, Gloria Russo, I bequeath 52% of my shares in Russo Development Group, along with all associated voting rights." I paused briefly before continuing. "This decision is made with full knowledge of my son Vincent's treatment of Gloria. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity not because she lacks ability, but because she lacked support." A strange sound escaped Isabella's throat. I continued reading. "Gloria is not slow. Gloria was abandoned. I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death." I lowered the document and looked directly at my father. "My grandmother wrote something else," I said. "Vincent has confused credentials with character and degrees with worth. He attempted to strip me of my voting rights because I saw through him. He marginalized Gloria because she reminded him of the kind of person he refuses to become." My father said nothing, but his hands were shaking. I finished reading the final line. "I built this company from nothing. I choose who carries it forward. I choose Gloria." Charles Davenport slowly removed his glasses. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, "can you confirm that this document is legally binding?" "I can," Whitaker replied. "The 2015 will has been superseded. As of this moment, Gloria Russo is the majority shareholder of Russo Development Group." Across the table, Helen Bradford allowed herself a quiet smile. Thomas Caldwell and Laura Bennett exchanged surprised glances. And for the first time in my life, my father looked at me with something other than dismissal. "Will absolutely contest. Gloria has no business experience. She cannot run a company." "I am not asking to run the company," I replied. I turned to address the entire board. "I am asking you to examine the facts." I pulled another document from my portfolio. The minutes from the March 14th, 2018 board meeting. In that meeting, Vincent Russo proposed Resolution 2018-07 to reduce Margaret Sinclair's voting shares from 52% to 10%. I found the relevant passage. His stated reasoning was that the founder was no longer capable of understanding modern business operations. "That statement was taken out of context," my father interrupted. "The resolution failed by 2 votes, I continued calmly. "Margaret Sinclair's vote and Helen Bradford's." I turned toward Helen. "Is that correct?" Helen nodded slowly. "It is. Margaret called me the night of that meeting. She was devastated." "Not because of the proposal," she continued, "but because her own son had tried to take control of everything she built." "This is ancient history," my father said impatiently. "No," I said quietly. "It is evidence." "Evidence that my grandmother was fully aware of what was happening around her when she wrote the 2019 will." I looked around the room. She wasn't confused. She wasn't manipulated. She was protecting herself from her own son. And she was protecting me. Charles Davenport scanned the faces around the table. "Does anyone here have documentation that contradicts what has just been presented?" Silence settled over the room. My father's jaw moved slightly, as if he were trying to speak, but no words came out. Across the table, Isabella stared down at the polished surface, the calm composure she had perfected over the years, finally beginning to fracture. For the first time since the meeting began, Thomas Caldwell spoke. "Charles," he said carefully, I believe we should take a short recess so legal counsel can review these documents. Agreed, Charles Davenport replied after glancing at his watch. We will reconvene in 15 minutes. Mr. Whitaker, please remain available. The board members stood. Quiet conversations filled the room. My father did not move. He remained seated, staring at the portrait of Margaret Sinclair above the fireplace. I wondered if he could feel her watching. 15 minutes stretched into 45. During that time, the company's legal counsel, a thin man named Patterson, spent nearly the entire break on the phone with Whitaker and Hale, Chase private client, and the New York State Court Records Office. I sat alone at the end of the table. Daniel Whitaker brought me a glass of water. Helen Bradford squeezed my shoulder as she passed. Across the room, my father and Isabella stood close together in a heated whisper, their quiet argument growing sharper with every minute. Finally, Patterson returned to the table and leaned down to whisper something into Charles Davenport's ear. Davenport's expression shifted. Surprise first, then quiet resignation. "Please take your seats," he said. The board members returned to their chairs. The atmosphere in the room had hardened into something tense and fragile. "Our legal counsel has confirmed the following," Davenport said, reading from a note. "The will presented by Miss Gloria Russo is valid under New York law. It supersedes all prior testamentary documents." Someone inhaled sharply. "Effective immediately," he continued, "Gloria Russo holds 52% of the shares of Russo Development Group." The silence that followed felt almost physical. "Additionally," Davenport said, "as majority shareholder, Miss Russo has the right to present motions to the board, including motions concerning executive leadership." He looked directly at me. "Miss Russo, do you wish to bring forward any motions?" I stood. My heart was beating hard in my chest, but my voice remained steady. "Yes," I said. "I have one motion." My father rose abruptly from his chair. "Charles, this is—" "Sit down, Vincent," Davenport said firmly. "Miss Russo has the floor." My father slowly lowered himself back into his chair. His face had turned pale. I looked around the table at 12 people who, until an hour earlier, had never considered me capable of anything important. Now they waited for my decision. In that moment, I held the power to end my father's career. I thought about my grandmother, and I made my choice. "I am not proposing to remove Vincent Russo as CEO," I said. The tension in the room shifted instantly. Isabella's head snapped upward. Even Helen Bradford looked surprised. "What I am proposing," I continued, "is a vote of confidence." I let the words settle. "The board will decide whether Vincent Russo retains its confidence as CEO of Russo Development Group. If the majority votes no confidence, he will resign. If the majority votes confidence, I will not interfere with the company's leadership while I remain the majority shareholder." "This is ridiculous," Isabella said as she stood. "You are turning this into a spectacle, a revenge fantasy." "No," I replied calmly, meeting her gaze. "This is corporate governance, the same process used in every properly run company." I paused briefly. "The same process my grandmother established in our bylaws 40 years ago." Then I looked toward my father. If he still has the board's confidence, he has nothing to worry about. Charles Davenport studied me for a long moment. Something like respect appeared in his expression. "Is there a second for this motion?" "Seconded," Helen Bradford said immediately. "Very well," Davenport said. "We will vote." He looked around the table. "All those expressing confidence in Vincent Russo as CEO, please raise your hands." 4 hands rose, my father's allies, men who owed their board positions to him. Davenport nodded slowly. "All those expressing no confidence." 7 hands lifted. Davenport counted once, then again. Finally, he set down his pen. "The motion passes," he said. 7 votes to 4, with 1 abstention. He turned toward my father. "Mr. Russo, the board has voted no confidence. Under Section 14.3 of the company bylaws, you have 30 days to tender your resignation." My father did not say anything. He stood. And for the first time in my life, he truly looked at me. I expected anger, rage, threats. Instead, I saw something worse. Recognition. The realization that he had underestimated me so completely that it had cost him everything. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room. I know what some people might be thinking. Why did I not simply fire him? Why give him any chance at all? Because because destroying someone does not erase what they did to you. And because my grandmother did not raise me to be cruel. She raised me to be fair. If this part of the story resonates with you, because the story is far from finished. Now let me tell you what happened after the boardroom finally emptied. My father caught up with me in the private hallway outside the conference room. My mother was with him. Someone must have called her during the recess. Her face was streaked with tears, mascara smeared beneath her eyes. "You," my father said, his voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "You, ungrateful, scheming, Vincent," my mother whispered quickly, gripping his arm. "Not here. She just destroyed our family in front of 12 people. I stood my ground. "I didn't destroy anything," I said calmly. "I told the truth." "The truth?" He laughed bitterly. "Your grandmother was manipulated. That lawyer must have convinced her to sign that will." "She wrote that will 5 months after you tried to strip her of her voting rights," I replied, "because she saw exactly who you were." My voice never wavered. "You didn't lose because I betrayed you. You lost because you betrayed her." My mother stepped forward. "Gloria, sweetheart, you need to understand something. We were trying to protect you. You have always struggled. We didn't want to put pressure on you." "You didn't protect me," I said quietly. "You erased me." 28 years of silence finally turned into words. Every Christmas dinner, every family photo, every conversation where you praised Isabella and pretended I didn't exist. That wasn't protection, that was abandonment. "That's not fair," my mother said weakly. "You're right," I answered. "It wasn't fair." I looked straight into her eyes. I spent my entire life trying to prove I was worthy of this family. I'm done proving anything. The documents speak for themselves. My father suddenly grabbed my arm. "This isn't over," he said through clenched teeth. "We will contest that will." I pulled my arm free. "You'll lose," I said simply. "And you already know it. Grandma planned for every possibility, including this one." I turned and walked toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard my mother call out, "Gloria, wait!" I didn't stop. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their permission to leave. The elevator doors closed on their faces. I leaned against the brushed steel wall and finally exhaled. The adrenaline that had carried me through the last 2 hours slowly drained away. What replaced it surprised me. It wasn't victory. It wasn't satisfaction. It was grief. In that boardroom, I hadn't just defeated my father. I had let go of 28 years of hope. Hope that if I tried hard enough, if I stayed quiet enough, if I proved myself enough, my parents would finally see me the way they saw Isabella. That hope was gone now. And I was the one who had buried it. The elevator descended 42 floors. By the time it reached the lobby, I had wiped my eyes and straightened the oversized blazer I had borrowed from my roommate. Daniel Whitaker was waiting near the security desk. "That was," he began, searching for the right word. "Remarkable." "It was necessary," I said. "Your grandmother would agree." He walked beside me toward the building's exit. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now I go home," I said. "I sleep, and then I try to figure out what my life looks like without the family I thought I had." I paused. "And without the company." He looked surprised. "You don't want to be CEO?" "I never wanted to be CEO." We stopped at the revolving doors. "I just want the company my grandmother built to be run by people who actually care about it," I said. "Not people who see it as their personal inheritance." Whitaker nodded slowly. "The board will want to meet with you soon," he said. "They'll need to discuss transition plans and your role moving forward." "I know," I replied, "but not today." I stepped outside and felt the warm Manhattan sunlight hit my face. Today, I just want to be Gloria Russo, not a shareholder, not a victim, not a symbol. I looked back at Russo Tower, 42 floors of glass and steel carrying my family's name. "And tomorrow," I said quietly, "I start building something new." May 19th, 2024. At exactly 4 p.m., Vincent Russo signed his resignation letter. I wasn't there to see it. I learned about it through an email from Charles Davenport. "Miss Russo, your father has formally submitted his resignation, effective June 15th, 2024. The board has appointed me interim CEO while we conduct a search for permanent leadership," the email continued. "Additionally, the board would like to offer you the position of strategic advisor to the board. This role would allow you to participate in major decisions while you determine your long-term relationship with the company. Please let me know your thoughts." I read the email 3 times. Old habits. Then I forwarded it to Daniel Whitaker for review. His reply came less than an hour later. "Fair offer. No hidden conditions. Congratulations, Gloria." That evening, a company-wide email went out to every employee at Russo Development Group. "Effective June 15th, Vincent Russo will step down as CEO." The message continued. "Charles Davenport will serve as interim CEO. Additionally, the board welcomes Gloria Russo as strategic advisor in her capacity as majority shareholder. We thank Vincent Russo for his years of service and wish him well in future endeavors." My phone immediately began buzzing with messages. Colleagues I had worked beside for 2 years. People who had never even learned my name suddenly wanted to meet for coffee. They wanted to reconnect. They wanted to talk. I ignored most of them. But one message caught my attention. It came from Angela Morales, an executive assistant who had started at the company in 1987 and had worked closely with my grandmother. "Gloria, Margaret used to talk about you all the time," she wrote. "She said you noticed things other people missed. I never fully understood what she meant until today. Welcome to the boardroom. She would be proud of you." I saved that message. Sometimes validation does not come from family. Sometimes that makes it more meaningful. A week later, the story reached the public. New York Business Journal ran the headline, "Russo Development Group Shakeup. Founder's Granddaughter Takes Control After Secret Will Surfaces." The article did not mention my name directly. Corporate privacy laws prevented that. But anyone in Manhattan's real estate circles knew exactly who it was about. "In a dramatic turn of events," the article read, "the presumed heir to the Russo Development Group empire has been displaced by a previously unknown family successor. Sources close to the board describe the leadership change as long overdue and cite concerns regarding the former CEO's management style. Soon, the social consequences began spreading outward. My parents suddenly canceled their appearance at the Metropolitan Museum Gala, citing health reasons through their publicist. 3 major investment partners requested meetings with me personally. Not with the board, not with my father, with me. 2 of them confirmed after long conversations that they would continue working with the company. "We have had concerns about Vincent's leadership for years," one of them admitted. "Your grandmother built something extraordinary. It is good to see her vision protected." The social ripple effects were impossible to ignore. Friends of my parents suddenly remembered previous commitments. Invitations to charity events quietly disappeared. The Russo name, once capable of opening every door on the Upper East Side, now carried a quiet asterisk beside it. I did not celebrate their humiliation, but I did not mourn it either. That Saturday morning, Helen Bradford called me. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "Ask me again in 6 months." "Fair answer," she said. There was a short pause. Margaret would have handled things exactly the same way, you know. "The vote of confidence instead of firing him?" I asked. "Yes," she said with a quiet laugh. Giving him a chance he probably didn't deserve. She always believed mercy was the most powerful move a person could make. After we hung up, I thought about that for a long time. Mercy was not weakness. Mercy was choice. And for the first time in my life, the choice had been mine. June 8th, 2024, 3 weeks after the board meeting. My phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. "Gloria," my mother's voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. "Can we talk? Just the 2 of us?" I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Midtown, neutral territory, somewhere my father could not appear unexpectedly with lawyers. When I arrived, she was already there. She looked older somehow. Even careful makeup could not hide the exhaustion in her face. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly, wrapping both hands around a cup of coffee she had not touched. "I know I don't deserve it." "What do you want, Mom?" "To apologize." The word came out fragile. "For everything. For the way we treated you, for the things we said, for the things we never said." I studied her for a moment. "Are you apologizing because you're sorry?" I asked. "Or because everything changed?" She flinched. The question hung between us for several seconds. "Both," she finally admitted. I hate that the answer is both. Her eyes filled with tears. I was so focused on Isabella's success, on maintaining the image of the perfect family. I told myself we were protecting you from expectations you couldn't meet. She swallowed. But that was a lie, I told myself, so I wouldn't feel guilty. "You let Dad call me worthless in front of relatives and business partners," I said quietly. "You never defended me. Not once." "I know." A tear rolled down her cheek. "And I cannot undo any of it. But Gloria, I don't want to lose you completely. I don't even know if it's possible to fix anything, but I had to try." I looked at the woman who had been my mother for 28 years. The woman who had braided my hair when I was a child. The woman who later forgot my birthday. "I can't pretend the last 20 years didn't happen," I said slowly, "but I'm willing to try building something new. Something honest." She nodded silently, unable to speak. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. August 2024, 2 months later. I was walking through Central Park when my phone rang again. This time the caller ID read Isabella. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. Gloria, she said when I answered. I know I probably have no right to ask this, but can we meet? There was a pause. There's something I need to say. We sat on a bench near Bethesda Fountain in Central Park. The August heat pressed down on the city, heavy and slow. Isabella looked different. The armor of perfection she had worn her entire life had cracked. Dark circles framed her eyes, and her hair was tied back in a careless knot. I've been in therapy, she said without any introduction. Since May. 3 times a week. That's good, I said. It's brutal, she replied with a dry laugh. Turns out being the golden child isn't actually a privilege. It's just another kind of cage. I waited. Dad expected perfection, she continued. Every grade, every award, every achievement. None of it was ever enough. It was only the starting point for the next expectation. She looked down at the water of the fountain. And the way they treated you. I told myself that was just how things were. I convinced myself you were different, that I was protecting you by staying quiet. You weren't protecting me. No, she admitted softly. I was protecting myself. Because if I defended you, I would have become the target too. Finally, she turned and looked at me. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. What do you want from me, Isabella? I asked. Nothing, she said. Her voice broke slightly. I don't deserve anything. I just needed you to know something. She paused. I see you now. Really see you. And I'm sorry I didn't look sooner. We sat there quietly for a while. 2 sisters who had grown up in the same house, yet had lived like strangers. I can't go back to the way things were, I said eventually. But I'm not interested in staying enemies either. Maybe we start over. From the beginning. Her eyes filled with tears. I'd like that. It wasn't the sisterhood I had imagined as a child, but maybe, with time, it could become something real. November 2024, 6 months after the board meeting. I moved into my own apartment in Brooklyn Heights, a small 1-bedroom in a pre-war building with a view of the bridge my grandmother had crossed every morning when she first opened her office in 1965. The rent was more than I had ever paid before, but I could afford it now. My new position at Russo Development Group was Director of Sustainable Development with a salary of $185,000 a year, plus dividends from my shares. The role had been my idea. A new division focused on environmentally responsible construction, sustainable real estate projects, and long-term environmental impact. Exactly the kind of forward-thinking work my grandmother would have supported. My father called once a month now. The conversations were short and polite. He asked about the weather, about my apartment, about work. We both pretended the past had not happened. It was easier that way. My mother and I began having lunch every other week. Slowly and awkwardly, she was learning to see me as a person rather than a problem. It wasn't the mother-daughter relationship I once dreamed of. But it was honest. And honesty was something we had never had before. Isabella and I sometimes met for coffee on weekends. We were learning about each other for the first time as adults. She talked about the pressure she had carried her entire life. I talked about the loneliness. Neither of us tried to pretend the past had been acceptable, but we were writing a new chapter. On the wall of my apartment hung my grandmother's portrait, the same one that had watched over the boardroom for 40 years. Sometimes, when the evening light touched it just right, it almost looked as if she were smiling. You did it, Grandma, I would think. You gave me the tools. I just had to find the courage to use them. 6 months earlier, I had been invisible. Now, I was finally myself. Looking back, I understand something I could not see when I was 27. My grandmother didn't leave me control of her company because I was better than Isabella. She left it to me because she knew I wouldn't let power change who I was the way it had changed my father. My dyslexia isn't a flaw. It's part of how my mind works. The same mind that remembers visual patterns, notices connections others miss, and understands systems in ways traditional reading never allowed. The things that made me seem slow to my parents were the same things that helped me see the truth when others chose to ignore it. My father judged people by credentials, degrees, and public success. My grandmother judged people by character, kindness, and how they treated those who could not fight back. And now, finally, I get to judge my own worth. Not by my parents' expectations, not by my sister's achievements, not by what strangers on the internet might think, by my own standards, by my own values, by my own truth. The message I want to leave with you is simple, but it took me 28 years to truly understand it. Your worth is not defined by the people who fail to see it. For most of my life, I believed the story my family told about me. I believed that because I struggled, because I learned differently, because I didn't shine the way they expected, I was somehow less capable. I spent years trying to earn approval from people who had already decided who I was. What I learned is that approval is not the same as truth. Sometimes the people who underestimate you are not seeing your weakness. They are simply unable to recognize your strengths. My grandmother understood something my parents never did. Character matters more than credentials, and kindness matters more than status. She didn't believe in me because I was perfect. She believed in me because she knew I would use power responsibly when the time came. The real lesson of my story isn't about inheritance or money. It's about courage. The courage to stop shrinking yourself to fit other people's expectations. The courage to stand up when you've been dismissed for years. And most importantly, the courage to see your own value even when no one else does. Because the moment you truly see yourself, everything changes. If this story resonated with you, please take a second to like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Tell me where you're watching from, or share a moment in your life when you had to stand up for yourself. Your story matters too. Thank you for spending this time with me, and until the next story, take care of yourself.